Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Rebekah Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan Elrom.
In our top story, U.S. and Israeli forces have pounded the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen. The U.S. military confirmed that it struck a Houthi command and control center, as well as several units housing conventional weapons, missiles, and drones. These facilities were used in Houthi attacks on the U.S. Navy and on vessels in the southern Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The IDF targeted weapons shipments and military infrastructure at Yemen's primary airport in Sana'a. It also struck 3 major ports and 2 power stations in the country. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned that Israel is just getting started with the Houthis. He said, "We will strike them to the bitter end until they learn. Just as Hamas, Hezbollah, and Syria learned, the Houthis will learn too."
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is back to work after undergoing emergency prostate removal surgery in Jerusalem last week. Justice Minister Yair Levin was temporarily sworn in as acting prime minister during the procedure, and Defense Minister Israel Katz was given authorization to convene the security cabinet if necessary. Netanyahu left the hospital against medical advice last Tuesday to attend several important votes in the Knesset. A statement released by the Prime Minister's office thanked the team of surgeons and the dedicated medical staff at Hadassah Ein Kerem Hospital for their care and assured the people of Israel that Netanyahu is on the road to recovery.
The remaining leaders of the Hamas terror group have attempted to incite violence by falsely claiming that Jews are attempting to take over the Temple Mount. Israel is one of the only places in the Middle East that protects freedom of religion. Unfortunately, this freedom does not extend to the holiest place in Judaism. In 1967, Israeli paratroopers liberated the old city of Jerusalem from the Jordanians, but in an effort to appease the Muslim population, Israel agreed to allow the Muslim Waqf to manage the Temple Mount. This Islamic religious body heavily restricts non-Muslim visitation to Mount Moriah and strictly forbids Jews and Christians from praying there. The Palestinian Authority and other Arab terror groups have repeatedly attempted to incite violence by falsely claiming that Jews are attempting to Judaize the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Israel's Ministry of Defense has signed an agreement to purchase 5 new fast-attack missile ships from the Israel shipyards. These new Reshef-class vessels are the most advanced boats in the Israeli Navy. They are equipped with Israel's cutting-edge weapons defense systems, as well as revolutionary technology designed to give the Israeli Navy maritime supremacy. The 2.8 billion shekel deal is one of Israel's largest internal purchases and is part of the Defense Ministry's mission to strengthen independent Israeli arms production.
Jerusalem has disclosed some details of the daring raid on Iranian targets deep inside Syrian territory in September. According to reports, the Jewish state had been closely monitoring several sites used by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. It collected intelligence that Tehran had transferred components for precision-guided missiles and was ramping up to mass-produce rockets for Hezbollah. Jerusalem dispatched an elite commando unit to infiltrate the fortified facility in the heart of Syrian territory and destroy it.
El Al, Israel's flagship airline, has announced the suspension of flights to Moscow for at least 3 months after a commercial airliner was shot down by Russian forces last week. 38 people were killed when the Azerbaijan passenger jet crash-landed near the Caspian Sea. Russian President Vladimir Putin apologized for the tragic incident and acknowledged that Russian air defenses had been installed in the region to neutralize Ukrainian drones. El Al was one of the last Western airlines to offer service to Moscow after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. About 1.3 million Israelis speak Russian, and many of them still have family in the former Soviet Union. El Al released a statement saying, after conducting a comprehensive situation assessment, El Al is suspending all of its operations on the Tel Aviv-Moscow route until the end of the winter schedule. Jews in Syria have finally been able to return to the remains of the ancient Elijah the Prophet synagogue in downtown Damascus. This 2,700-year-old Jewish house of worship was repeatedly bombed and looted during the 13-year Syrian civil war. Now, with the fall of the brutal Assad regime, the handful of Jews living in Syria can again visit the site of their historic synagogue. The Jewish community of Syria dates back to the prophet Elijah's journey to Damascus nearly 3,000 years ago. In the year 1099 of the Common Era, 50,000 Jews fled Jerusalem for Damascus when the Crusaders sacked the Holy City. And in 1492, Jews fleeing the Spanish Inquisition took refuge in Syria. This beautiful, vibrant community lived and worshiped freely in Syria for thousands of years and became home to one of the world's largest Jewish communities. After the establishment of the State of Israel, Jewish property in Syria was seized and severe restrictions were enforced against the Jews, prompting almost all of them to flee the country. Their plight has been highlighted in a new report on the expulsion of Jews from Arab countries. Rebekah has more on that.
Yes, Yochanan, a new report released by Justice for Jews from Arab countries details the enormous losses Jews suffered when they were expelled from Arab lands. Jewish communities established deep roots across North Africa and the Middle East over thousands of years and predated Islam by a millennium. After the creation of the State of Israel, Jewish populations from 11 countries were forced to become refugees, leaving almost all of their possessions behind. This expulsion has become known as one of the largest forced displacements of modern times. For 6 years, the JJAC has been researching the plight of Jewish refugees from Arab lands. The organization noted that achieving genuine peace in the Middle East depends on confronting historical facts and ensuring that justice prevails. It said that any meaningful reconciliation in the region must incorporate the complete historical narrative, particularly the plight of Jews expelled from Arab nations and Iran.
Archaeologists with the Israel Antiquities Authority have announced the discovery of a treasure trove of Hasmonean coins in the Judean desert. During the recent Hanukkah holiday, a team from the University of Haifa was excavating a site in the Jordan Valley connected to the Israelite king Jonathan, who reigned from the year 104 before the Common Era until 76 BCE. King Jonathan was the grandson of Shimon the high priest and the great-nephew of the hero of the Hanukkah story, Judah Maccabee. Archaeologists excavating the main road to the Alexandrian fortress built by the Jewish king discovered a cache of over 200 coins, as well as extensive evidence of ancient Jewish life in the area. And in other news, archaeologists excavating on Jerusalem's Mount of Olives announced the discovery of a 1,700-year-old oil lamp completely intact. This was an especially meaningful find during Hanukkah, as the lamp is decorated with images of the ancient Jewish temple in Jerusalem.
Bible-believing Jews and Christians are eagerly awaiting President Donald Trump's return to the White House and have already laid the groundwork for unprecedented cooperation with the Jewish state. Josh Reinstein, the president of the Israel Allies Foundation, explained that for 21 years, the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus has worked to mobilize Bible-believing Christians around the world to turn their biblical support into real political action. He said that he believes the best is yet to come for faith-based diplomacy. Reinstein predicted that the Trump administration will be the most pro-Israel administration in the history of American-Israel relations, even more so than the last Trump administration, which he hailed as Israel's greatest supporter to date. Member of Knesset Moshe Tour-Paz, the new co-chair of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, said, "We know we may have new challenges ahead, but we have strong friends in the United States, in Congress, and in the White House."
Israel's Central Bureau of Statistics has released its end-of-the-year report, announcing that the Jewish state is now home to more than 10 million citizens. The census report states that at the end of 2024, the population exceeded 10 million people, including just over 7.7 million Jews, 2.1 million Arab Israelis, and 216,000 foreigners. Since the outbreak of the war on October 7, 2023, nearly 24,000 Israelis returned to Israel from abroad, and 34,000 Jews immigrated or made Aliyah to Israel. The CBS also noted that 181,000 babies were born in the Jewish state in 2024. This marks the first time since the destruction of the Second Temple that the majority of the Jews in the world once again live in Israel. That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Gedaliah Blum. He's the director of the Heartland Initiative. Gedaliah, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Tell our viewers a little about what is the Heartland Initiative.
The Heartland Initiative is it's a platform to build stronger ties to Israel through official channels, through mayor to mayor, governor to governor, church member to rabbi. We're looking to essentially capitalize on our friendships that we already have in the world and to create actions around it.
Look, you've had a big focus in Africa. A lot of people aren't focused on Africa. Why do you think it's so important to crack that nut?
When I started Heartland Initiative a couple of years ago, I said, I'm only going to focus on Judea and Samaria. And I realized that there's no context there. You're too super focused in one area where the real issue is much greater. And let me explain. There's actually a film called Tragic Awakening that I saw. It's a documentary with featuring Rohan Osman, which I know that you had on your show last week. The film is a diagnosis of what Jew hatred is, what anti-Israel hatred is. And it's essentially against the New World Order that the Jewish people received the Torah on Mount Sinai, okay? Now, this value system upended the whole system, the whole world order, and has then been adopted by the Christians. So we're seeing this crazy cultural war that's happening today, whether it's the wokeism, Islamism, communism. And if you look at all the anti-Israel people in the world, or the countries, they're non-Western, Judean-Christian, valued-centered countries. So we're dealing with African nations who are steeped in Christian, Judean-Christian values, but they're also in the midst of this war. 60,000 Christians were slaughtered by jihadists in Nigeria alone. You're seeing what's going on in South Africa. There's like this upend of culture. So going to Africa essentially is to say, we need to strengthen us together in fighting against this cultural war. Yes, Israel's at the front line, but this is your war as well.
You've been very active about speaking up for the Kurdish community. Your organization is focused solely on Israel. Why is supporting the Kurds an Israel issue?
So let me say, it's not just the Kurds, because Syria right now is being upended. It's very questionable about what exactly day to day, hour to hour. I'm getting updates from my friends in Syria, from the Kurds, from the Druze, from a lot of ethnic minorities. What they all have in common is that, and what we have in common also in Israel, in the world generally speaking, is that they're being pushed hard by the jihadists. This Judean-Christian value is not just Jews and Christians. The Kurds also hold this value system. The Druze also hold this values of the Yazidis. And so when we support those people who share our value system, we're strengthening Israel.
Why are you not seeing more of a call to support the Kurds from the outgoing Biden administration? Here you have a population that's been so loyal to the American position in this area, yet it seems like they're being left for the slaughter to Turkey and that horrible Islamic State movement.
At the end of the day, you could look at the interests where it's not as like, although I love America, I love Israel, we all have our own interests. And so it may not be in the interest to support the Kurds from the Biden administration's perspective, because maybe there's a lot of business with Turkey. That NATO is a big issue with Turkey, right? So even though Turkey's using NATO drones to bomb civilian areas in Kurdistan, there seems to be some sort of fear there. And just like the fear we saw with Iran, which we saw was a paper tiger when we got rid of their proxies, it looks like Erdogan is taking over, is looking to fill this vacuum. and the Kurds are their first target. We need to see they're the canary in the coal mine now. And if it's up to us as people who are against this jihadi revolution and this world order, we need to fight for all of our allies. Because again, like I said, if you are strengthening those people and nations with the same value systems as we have as Jews and Christians, this is how we're going to have world peace, as corny as that sounds.
There's been a lot of terrible anti-Israel sentiment during the Biden years. And now people are very optimistic with Trump coming in. It's 2 weeks away from inauguration. What do you expect is going to change in the Middle East?
So first and foremost, it wasn't a political difference. It was a cultural difference. And again, it goes back to the idea of Judeo-Christian values. If you look at, let's say, Kamala Harris at one of her rallies, someone screamed out, from the audience, something about God. And what was her reaction? Oh, go to the other rally over there down the street with Trump. That's where God is. God's not with the Democrat Party. And that's where they lost a lot of people. Because I think overall the basis on whether you're Democrat or Republican, they have a shared culture, a shared value system that was being upended by this very loud, very organized minority of people. So what do I see now? I see just a rewind back to our common sense.
There are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
So my message is actually about this Judeo-Christian values, and that the fight against the Jews is really a fight against our shared values. So not to look at Israel as the external factor that, oh, this is Israel's problem, this is the Jewish problem. It's not. This is your problem. And so when we're dealing with Christians, when we're talking to Christians face to face, I say, you need to do something. You need to be activated. And I think that people need to understand that every single bit counts. And we need to stand up and be proud for who we are and what we represent, and not to silence ourselves, not to self-censor ourselves out of fear of this cult of personality, what's going on today in this world.
Thank you, Gedaliah, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
And now the truth from Zion.
Persia. You know it as an ancient and historic nation, one of the oldest in the world. But today it is called the Islamic Republic of Iran. In 1979, the name was changed, and with it, their culture as well. Freedom of religion is virtually non-existent in the Islamic Republic. Today, 90% of Iranians practice the Shiite branch of Islam, while other religious groups are living in fear. Islam was not the primary religion for Persians until the 7th century of the Common Era, when the Muslim conquest dominated many places and peoples. The takeover began in the year 632, following the death of their prophet Muhammad in what is today Saudi Arabia. After his death, his followers worked to establish a caliphate, the political religious state comprising the Muslim community and the lands and peoples under its dominion. Islam was a fairly new religion at the time. Judaism predates it and is the oldest of the Abrahamic religions, beginning some 3,320 years ago in the year 1800 before the Common Era. Christianity came afterwards, emerging in the 1st century CE. As Islam grew, it swept across nations from Spain to India, including countries in North Africa. Iran's constitution considers only Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and Zoroastrianism to be legitimate religions that can be practiced openly. Despite this protection, in recent years, Iran has routinely persecuted those who do not practice the Shiite stream of Islam.
Iran is not simply a fundamentalist Muslim state. It's a fundamentalist state which is absolutely intolerant to any other views, to any other religion, to any other type of Muslim religion.
The fastest growing religion in Iran today is Christianity. The Christian community faces discrimination, and they report that their places of worship are being closed down as congregants face outright harassment. Converts from Islam to Christianity frequently suffer intense pressure to recant their new faith. But the abuse does not stop there. Iranian Christians often experience random arrest and detention before ultimately being forced into rigged trials, which result in lengthy prison sentences. Despite these challenges, many Iranian Christians continue to practice their beliefs in secret, clinging to their faith even in this challenging environment. United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken slammed the Iranian government after the U.S. State Department released its 2022 report on religious freedoms in Iran. Iran's government uses religion to deny women their individual freedoms and shows a great leniency to men who have carried out so-called honor killings, when a man murders a female family member who they claim has acted immodestly. Iran's current constitution states that all citizens shall enjoy human, political, economic, and other rights in conformity with Islamic criteria. If it does not conform, a person could be legally punished with amputation, flogging, and stoning. In 2021, Iran's parliament went so far as to amend the penal code to criminalize insulting Islamic schools of thought. Shortly after that rule went into effect, 3 men were brought to trial after converting to Christianity. When they arrived in court, their lawyers were forbidden from representing them. The judge forced the defendants to advocate for themselves. Eventually, the men were released on bail. Some 17 Christian congregants from their church were also harassed at this time. Iran's 2021 amendment permits a judge to sentence these so-called deviants to imprisonment, a loss of voting rights for 15 years, and hefty fines. In 2022 alone, Iran carried out at least 576 executions. A human rights group found that the government cracked down on religious minorities by arresting 140 individuals, imprisoning 39 of them, issuing travel bans on 51, raiding homes of 94, and bringing 11 to trial simply for their religious beliefs. Government officials, and especially the country's supreme leader, regularly disseminate anti-Semitic rhetoric and deny the Holocaust, spreading hate to citizens of the country with false information and inflammatory messages. The Islamic Republic of Iran has become a brutal theocracy that does not allow the right to freedom of religion. Up next, the ICEJ Report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
Shalom, dear friends, here from Jerusalem. I want to approach you today with a complicated subject, and that is, what does the Bible say about war? And also, is Israel committing war crimes today in the Middle East? Of course, many Christians, in particular in the Western world, they are leaning very strong to pacifism. They say Christians should at no point enter into a war situation. And this situation, or this attitude in particular, arose in the dawn of World War II, that saw such horrendous bloodshed all across Europe and even beyond Europe. And Christians came to the conclusion that Christians should have no place in any war whatsoever. However, this is an attitude, of course, that the Western world can afford today, because neither most part of Europe, neither the United States or the North American continent were engaged on their own continent in any warlike situation. And I want to quote here one of our friends and theologian, Jerry McDermott, who wrote in one of the recent essays he did about the war and conflict with Hamas in Gaza. He says the following: pacifism is the immoral privilege reserved for those who sit safely at home. And I believe there is a lot of truth to that, because here in Israel we cannot afford being pacifist, because otherwise the state of Israel would not be surviving. Israel needs to have his young men in the army to defend the safety of the nation of Israel, and they could not survive otherwise. And I want to quote a few centuries earlier, one of the church saints, Thomas Aquinas, what his take on war was. And he actually coined an expression that was called a just war. He says in his mind, there is something like a just war. He says Christians should avoid, in any case, if possible, any war. But he says there is a just war under three conditions. He says, number one, he says, a just war is a just war when it's not initiated by individuals or by small militias. It needs to come from the king or from the government. And secondly, he says a just war is a war that has a just cause. That means it needs to punish evil and rectify wrong that are carried out. And thirdly, he says a war is a just war when the end of that war will be a more peaceful, a more righteous, a more just situation for the parties of that war. And in a way, I believe this definition can be helpful even applying to this current conflict, because I can assure you that Israel is not engaging this war with any vicious intent, but actually they want to bring forth a more peaceful solution and situation for the communities, not only around Gaza, but also for everybody who is living in Gaza. And I believe there is no doubt today around the world that the regime of Hamas in Gaza, it is an evil regime that defies any respect for human rights or human dignity or human values. And there is a great consensus around the world that they need to disappear from the Gaza communities and, if possible, also from other areas in the Middle East. And I want you to pray for Israel in your churches, in your congregation, that they experience that the Lord is mighty in battle on their side, that he is fighting their battles as they are ridding the world of the evil of this wicked terrorist organization. And I wish you God's blessing to that. Shalom from Jerusalem.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Rebekah Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan Elrom, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.